The reason I ride, and I think the reason, I won't speak for everyone, like there's many reasons we ride, but the reason that I ride and a lot of our owners ride and a lot of other people ride is they want to experience the sort of augmented reality. And when I say that, I mean a very different thing than a virtual reality, the augmented reality of the real world. And what a motorcycle can do is it's a machine that can help you augment reality. Because what is there that's more moving and more powerful than propelling yourself through the world, and to be able to do that with this motor that makes you go faster than you can run, that can and being able to control that motor. And like, to me, the most fun thing is like downshifting into a corner. I love that. And like just ringing a bike out, and you can't do that on a Ducati on a little road. Like you're in second gear. Welcome to the Janus Motorcycles podcast. Our kind of motorcycling is different from what you see from big brands and big bikes. We manufacture classic, simple, small displacement motorcycles because that's what we like to ride. And we're not alone. On this podcast, we talk with some of the smartest and most interesting people we know in motorcycling, design, and manufacturing. We're glad you're here. Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of Why We Ride, the Janus Motorcycles podcast. I'm Richard Worsham, co-founder here at Janus and your host of the podcast. In this episode 8, we're going to do something a little different than we have in the past. Well, actually, two things different. One is, as you can tell so far, I imagine, this is an audio recording without video. This just worked out better because we actually are going to be collaborating on this episode with another podcast called Creative Riding. If you already are aware of Creative Riding podcast, you will know that they're an audio podcast based in Los Angeles and that they've already published their version of the same recording. If not, this is your first introduction to Creative Riding, and I welcome you to and encourage you to check out their funky, new, different kind of power sports reporting, if we can call it that. Anyway, as a sort of brief introduction to Creative Riding, I was looking for other podcasts to kind of collaborate with, and just kind of created a list and went down it. And one of the podcasts that I found was Creative Riding, and contacted them kind of through their email, contact form, and got a response back from Junky, who is the main host over there, and we started a conversation, and it just so happened that he had run into several Januses in the wild out in the Los Angeles area, and that he was had talked to some owners and was already familiar with the brand and interested in learning more. So we struck up immediately a great conversation via email, and about a month later, I headed out to Los Angeles for a press trip to meet up with Jeff Buchanan from Roadrunner magazine to test ride and review both our 450 and 250, which incidentally, check our blog, check Roadrunner magazine, that just went up this week. It's a great little review kind of talking about the 450. I think the 250 review is coming up soon. Anyway, we managed to also meet up in person with Junky at the Petersen Museum in Los Angeles, and had a fantastic morning sitting over coffee, talking motorcycles, talking Janus, and then proceeded to ride bikes out of away. I'm not super familiar with Los Angeles, but from the Petersen Museum up onto Mulholland Drive, and got a chance to kind of zip around up there for a little bit. And Junky got a chance to ride the bikes. We came back down and kind of got lost on the way back, which was amazing and fun in beautiful Los Angeles and in the kind of museum district, and stopped back at the museum, said our farewells, and then I got a chance to walk through the Petersen Museum, which is a fantastic museum with cars and motorcycles, and it was about the last week of a display on an exhibit on electric motorcycles put on by Vintagent, also known as Paul d'Orléans, and got to do that. So that was really fun. Without further ado, we'll roll right into the interview with Junky of Creative Riding, in which he kind of turns the microphone around, and instead of me interviewing him, he interviews me. Enjoy.
We're doing a little bit of a crossover episode here. and I know you can use this audio as well as I can, but I'm hoping that this is sort of a way. Also, you've never interviewed yourself, and I can tell you that none of your guests on your show are going to turn it around and ask you. It's the hardest thing for a host to do, right? Is to say, hey, ask me some questions. So I'm hoping that through some of this interview, your listeners also get some of your perspective and get a good interview of you, the one of the co-founders of Janus, and get your inside, not just the people that you also enjoy talking to. So hopefully that's how this works out.
Sounds good. I hope they don't get too bored with hearing all about me, but yeah.
No, they're never going to get the chance. So this is the perfect opportunity for you to toot your own horn a little bit. One of the first questions I have, you already mentioned it a little bit. One of the first questions I had is like, what is your occupation? What are some of your credentials?
Credentials, good Lord. So I guess to answer that, I'll just kind of go back to our background with Janus and how I got into it. My background is it's probably the, like you say, the looking at it in reverse order. It's the opposite of what you would choose to do if you were going to try and get into the power sports manufacturing industry. I have a undergrad degree in literature and liberal arts from a tiny little school of like 100 students up in New England. And then I went straight from there and got a graduate degree in architecture, specializing in classical architecture, which most people kind of when they hear that, they think like buildings with columns on them, which is part of it, but it's like designing buildings like we have for like 99.999% of history, except since like 1930.
Yeah. It was like Art Deco and like modern, right? So.
Right, except that part. So my interests have always kind of been focused around the ideas of like tradition, classical concept of like imitation, which is not copying,
right,
and stuff like that. So anyway, right the year I graduated from Notre Dame with a degree in architecture, I founded a motorcycle company with a buddy.
Yeah, there you go. And that just knowing that kind of plays into the whole Janus, the whole feel and focus of Janus. So basically what you're saying also is that unlike 99% of the people in the power sports industry, you're super smart. Like
I don't know about that.
You got some degrees, and I think Brad Pitt is the only other guy that likes motorcycles and architecture, possibly. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I don't know if smart and starting a motorcycle company the year you graduate with an architecture degree is really those two go together. But anyway, yeah, I had a real interest in. While I did not grow up riding bikes, I've always been interested in vehicles, and kind of like
right.
As a kid designed cars. I had a little brand name, I was like, my idea was more, it was like a dream was to start a vehicle brand,
nice.
and having a logo and stuff like that was just kind of a cool idea. So it was really kind of fantastical to actually have that happen. But in terms of credentials, to actually answer your question, if there are any carryovers, which there are between architecture and automotive design, that's where they lie. Right, everything else has been learned on the job.
Well, and that's fantastic. It's awesome that you can start a company without having to do, put in decades of research and adjacent. So, this is awesome to just jump in, to know it can actually succeed for anybody out there that's crazy enough to want to start one right out of grad school. If you're listening. So. Before we get further into your background, I did want to start off with introductions. Now that we, have been introduced to you and know a little bit about you, you can never remake a first impression, right? And I'm not sure what you were expecting when you came out here. And I didn't know. I knew of Janus motorcycles, but I thought, wow, this is cool. This is like, you can't meet Soichiro Honda. You can't meet, anybody from these storied brands that are around, that have been around for a long time, and their founders are long gone. But it's such a, what a great opportunity to meet, the founder and make an impression on the person who started this bespoke company, small company, as you say. And
well, if we ever make it big, it'll be a real.
Listen. To me, just succeeding. For past a couple of years, when a lot of industries can't in this current environment is awesome. So when I walked in, we agreed to meet at the Petersen. Down in LA, which is a fabulous place for anybody automotive or gearhead to meet. It's just a great cafe, great environment.
Museum, but Petersen Automotive Museum, just for our listeners too,
Right.
just so you know.
Right. It's a museum, they have a little cafe on the side there that they let people like me sneak into. When I walked in, you locked on, and I knew that you were aware you had the right guy, because I'm a little bit greenish, my skin color. I'm 4'8" on a good day. I had kept kind of shuffling my feet, hoping you wouldn't notice that I had platform riding boots on. So I may have looked 5 feet tall, but I'm tiny. You and your daughter, on the other hand, I'm gonna guess that you're. I'm gonna take a shot in the dark here. You're 7'3" probably, and she's 6'9", respectively. And
6'6". 6'6".
Okay. Wow. That's her or you? Because
That's
you're
me.
taller.
That's me.
Oh,
not Mara.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So she's close probably. You both later on in the day we ride in the 250, and you both fit on that amazingly well. So kudos to you for designing the bike. But yeah, you're a giant. You guys are. I was like, wow, this is amazing, and it's like I was your little kid. So. Then we hit the streets. You're with this little goblin leading the way, and 100 yards into our trip, I almost smashed your bike into the back of a minivan. And I was like, "Oh, this is an awesome first impression, right?" And I won't get into the whys, but I didn't know if you were right next to me, and I hadn't adjusted the mirrors 100%. So I was like, "Oh crap, I'm gonna get over and smash into him," right? So instead, I just stayed 3 feet off the bumper of this van who kept slamming on their brakes. Then we head up into Laurel Canyon, and apparently so does a quarter of the LA traffic, right? I mean, I forgot how crowded that road gets. So we meander up this uncomfortable hill in this like almost stopped traffic with both of you on this little 250, right? And then we get up to Mulholland, which was closed because of the recent landslides. And I actually, some of the roads up there, you could still see dirt on the road that we were riding on where they had just cleared. So I'm thinking, what a great first impression. This is awesome. And then to top it off, I get us lost coming back down the hill, right? Because I didn't have GPS. So regardless, I mean, all of the crazy stuff that happened, it was one of the best times I've had in a long while, because I hate the west side and I hardly ever go riding over there. But it was so much fun. And I think it was because we were on Janus. You know what I'm saying? We got some looks.
I'm glad to hear that.
Lots of people were checking us out, and it was just cool to ride a motorcycle that you never have ridden and that you didn't expect to ride. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So for me, the first impression was awesome. For you, I just kept thinking, oh man, I hope he even comes back to California. I've probably scared. But yeah, I mean, it was so much fun, and I just can't wait to dive into this little motorcycle that you created that, just despite all the crazy stuff and being in probably the worst part of LA to ride, just having a blast on these things. First off, I have to know, what is your motorcycle background, your first motorcycle? Because you said you didn't get into it until later, but you had this fantasy. So what was your first motorcycle?
So my first bike that I was exposed to, my dad actually bought my mother a like early 80s 2-stroke Vespa, but it was a 50cc, little like, I forget what the XP50 or one of the little tiny small frame Vespas. And we rode that thing all over. I'm originally from Virginia, all over Richmond, Virginia, just terrorized the city on a little, at 35 miles per hour. And that was the first introduction. And then I think I'd witnessed a motorcycle accident when I was little, and so I was never really interested. I thought it was too dangerous, and it just like the image of motorcycling that is often portrayed in, I don't know, film or the media is what didn't really appeal to me. And so the Vespa kind of got around that, and then I bought a vintage moped, like the old pedal type. It was actually an Italian Garelli, and immediately kind of made connections with friends in that community, which especially 10, 15 years ago was just this, I think it still is, but I haven't really been a part of it in a long time. The moped army was this huge thing. There were clubs all over the country, and that's actually how I met the guy I founded Janus with when I moved out here in Indiana to go to Notre Dame. I met him because he had a repair shop, And that's how we kind of started thinking about motorcycles and two-wheeled things, I guess, and started developing the network of craftsmen that would allow us to start Janus. But yeah, that was kind of my background. Was more, as a kid, I was just fascinated by cars. My dad would take us to vintage car races.
Oh yeah.
And I'd get to go in the pits, and see these things and take pictures of them, and just, there's something about machines, especially the more visceral the machine, the better. Like, I remember I saw a Ferrari F40 and I just thought, this is really cool.
Yeah. Oh man, I am so glad to hear that. I take my kids to car stuff and motorcycle stuff, and they think I'm torturing them. So I'm so glad to hear that. That's an awesome. That's
now
awesome.
My daughters mostly you met Mara. I try and take the family on when we go to a motorcycle event or something. I'll try and bring either the whole family or one of them, and we go to Mid Ohio, which is kind of like the crazy Midwest event. It's it's just wild, and usually end up having a good time. And they're old enough now that I think I'm working on repairing an old moped for them to ride around on. So,
nice.
But yeah, those kind of experiences, I think they're really valuable.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what, your passion and your knowledge of other brands. I mean, I couldn't. You're, for somebody that didn't grow up, riding. You fooled me. You've got this intense knowledge, and maybe it's because you're a design and an engineer-minded person that you have to know the specs and the history, and you're into all this classical stuff. But you have this huge passion and knowledge of other brands. Has that come about since starting Janus, or was that before?
No, I think that was pre-existent. I mean, my parents are both. My father's an architect. My mother's an architect, or has a degree in architectural history. And I think the history side of it, and my interest in classical architecture. I mean, I've always been that. Like I said, like interested in tradition and reading the classics. Like, I'm interested in history and what the past, rather than treating it. I do not consider the past to be something that's behind us, and that we need to separate ourselves from and recreate ourselves as something completely new. That's kind of like what modernist architecture does. Is it says everything that's in the past is worthless, and we need to start from scratch, and everything. And then what that automatically means is that the only thing that's valuable in design is the expression of the designer as this kind of like genius. And that's kind of what I'm not interested in. Is I don't want to pursue like personalizing things or making it about my or anyone's character. It's more about like with Janus, what we do is we just, like, some people will make fun of us because they kind of call our bikes like a pastiche of old things kind of combined together and turned into a new product, but it's all old ideas. And I always say, yep. I mean, it kind of is. It's like we take we're not reinventing the wheel. We have no patents. We're taking the best of motorcycling, combining it into what we think a classic motorcycle should be. And my definition of classic is an example of the best. That's all it is.
Right.
And then making sure that we have to meet modern EPA standards. We have to have modern, highway safety. We have to have good brakes. We got to have all that stuff. So of course it's going to be modern, but we're interested in making something that's more focused on the experience of riding and like what we've learned about that over the last 90 years or so, and when it comes to motorcycles, and trying to make that as imminent as possible for the rider. And what that means is that it's going to look kind of delusional to some people that are just focused on horsepower specs or advanced technology. They're just like, why would you pay that much for a 250? And I understand, I get it, because the whole industry, the media, the advertising, the marketing is all going in a different direction. Yeah. And so we're kind of different. We're trying to create a kind of a new category of motorcycle. Boy, I'm rambling now, but
Oh no! Everything that you said kind of hits with me, because that's one of the my old co-host from Indiana told me, hey, that didn't that can't be from Indiana. I said, yeah, it is. This is a couple of years ago. And when I told him I went to get to ride one, the other day, he's like, oh, that's you could buy a lot of bike for that much money. And I said, but you can't buy I mean, sure, you could say that about anything. There's some mountain bikes that cost more, than a Janus. But
Right.
the thing is that it's not a Janus, and the whole thing. I mean, I try not to know anything about anybody, going into these interview style things, because I love discovering it along with the listeners. But you have so much out there, and you have so much content on your website, and you were on, Jay Leno's Garage, for example, and he even talked about the visceral feel of it. Yeah, this is definitely a 250, but definitely there's the quality of it. Like you were saying, you expanded on the quality of something that was old and made something that doesn't, you have to go back 100 years to find anything that even resembles a Janus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Only you can ride it through LA like we did a month ago. You know what I'm saying? So, and you don't have to worry about breaking down. You don't have to worry about machining your own, special parts, because these bikes that existed 100 years ago, I can tell you that they, the parts don't exist for them anymore, and they're often, you probably worry about breaking down more than riding, or kind of.
And that's part of that's
Yeah.
part of the experience for some people, and that is something that we kind of like tell people, like, the experience, not that your bike's going to break down, but the experience of riding, the ones that you remember, like the experiences that you remember are not the ones where everything went perfectly and it was just, it just was a effortless experience. That's a really good way of saying it. If effortless experiences you don't remember. What you remember is when you're like caught in a rainstorm, you get a flat tire, these things are like, if you're on a motorcycle adventure, that's obviously you want a bike that doesn't break down and all that kind of stuff, but you want a bike that, how about this? People don't buy motorcycles as a practical means of transportation to get from one place to another. Now, there are people who use them for that, but they have the option to use a car. They don't have to. And so here, at least in the States, we choose to ride motorcycles for the experience of riding. And that's what, like, when you say, like, you can buy a lot of motorcycle for that much money, I say, yeah. And what is it? What do you want when you buy a motorcycle? Do you want effortless experience, or do you want?
Right, and I have a question queued up for later. I don't want to spoil it right now, but I mean, there's some amazing things that you can do on anything. There's even, I was just kidding my friend, the same guy and another riding buddy of ours, that they want me to get these big ADV bike, and I said, I'm not going to do it. Like, to me, I'd rather try to cross the Kalahari on a C90 rather than know I can do it on an Africa Twin, something like that. So,
well, and it needs to be said that there are many different niches in the motorcycling community, and some people like a high-strung Italian sport bike. Some people like a big high-tech ADV bike. Some people want a loud cruiser, and though everyone should have the, like one of our first people we had on the podcast, everyone should have the privilege of riding all those bikes if they want to, and there's a beauty of in a lot of those experiences. Certainly not denigrating the experience of a big multi-cylinder adventure bike or a Harley Davidson on the highway. They're really good at certain things, but if you're trying to pare down to the essence of motorcycling, some of those things can be extraneous and they can distract you from what that is.
Right. And to be honest, up until I want to say 20 years ago ish, maybe even a little longer than that, but not much. 250 was a bike that was considered a standard. The big bikes were 500s and 750s and things like that. 900 was
absolutely.
Gigantic, what
absolutely.
I'm saying?
Maybe a bit longer than 20 years ago, but absolutely.
Well,
I mean, 650 was a big bike.
Right. Way to make me feel old, by the way. But my dad actually commuted to work to the Navy. Had to been about a 20 or 30, probably a 20-mile commute from when he moved out here to when he was in the Navy, and he commuted on I think he said his very first bike was a Yamaha, like a DT1 or something like that. It was just a 250 Enduro, and that was back then when the speed limit was 55, I mean, those things that was all you needed was a 250. They were affordable, and that was today's 650. You know, it's a middleweight bike, was because you had a bunch of smaller stuff, and 250 was a pretty common size. 250 and 350 was not, you know, out of the ordinary for a daily rider, freeway commute and everything, because the speed limits and everything weren't what they are today, and we didn't have, you know, Dodge Hellcats blowing by us at 95 miles an hour. You know,
that brings up, like, you know, oftentimes, like, anything less than 650 or maybe more nowadays, 1,000 is called, like, you know, like a beginner bike, or worse, a chick bike or something, which gets you into a whole land of ridiculousness. But look back at the history of motorcycling. All the greatest race bikes, the icons of the racing, the Norton Manx, the you know, the Moto Guzzi V8, all these bikes, you know, the Ducatis, like, if you look at all the Velisets, they were all sub 500. I mean, with some exceptions. Obviously, American bikes have always been pretty big displacement, but not high horsepower back in the day. And it's kind of like, well, those weren't beginner bikes.
Well, and a small fact, the winningest MotoGP rider ever, who a lot of people will say Giacomo Agostini, but it's actually, I think, Angel Nieto was the winningest. Most
50cc.
50cc was most of his, and you know, back, you know, Joey Dunlop used to race 50cc's.
Oh, he did 52, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, back, that's when the TTs and everything had these crazy classes. You'd have 50 up to 750, and he won most of his stuff on the 250s, you know? So, yeah, it's pretty amazing. Out of all the things that you could have done, I mean, all of this having been said, what the hell made you decide to start a motorcycle brand from scratch, especially right after right after grad school?
I don't know. It was probably just insanity. I don't know. Or really naive. But I had been working with the guy that I founded the company with. He had a vintage moped shop, as I said, and we were doing like kind of like high-end custom mopeds, and he was selling like $8,000 pedal type mopeds to pretty high profile, you know, clients in Chicago or New York. And just through that, we were thinking, like, we just got tired of updating and reimagine. Let's say we had this dream of doing like a 50cc race bike version of a moped. And we kept trying to, like, I had one that I made, like, it was called the Pukavus, and it was like a play on the Norton Triumph Triton, where you put a Triumph engine in a Norton frame back in the Cafe Racer era. And so I had a Puch engine, which is a very common, highly upgradable moped engine, in a Batavus frame, which is a really pretty bike but doesn't go very fast. So it was like the best of both worlds. But we got tired of kind of trying to come up with the bike that we wanted out of other people's old bits and pieces. And so we're like, well, let's just make one. And we just that was what got it started. Was we built you mentioned Angel Nieto, and it was really my fascination with those early 50cc Kreidler. Who's the other guy who was big in 50cc racing? Nieto, and then there was there were many people were into it. Suzuki was really into that as well. But those bikes, the minimalism and how like there's a famous, I think it's a derby that Nieto would have ridden, and it's like, it has the extra spark plugs screwed onto the frame, so he would like stop in the middle of the race and like swap out his plugs. And
no kidding.
Yeah, yes.
That is sick.
I mean, just like absolutely pared down to the bare minimum. If you highly recommend you look up one of these bikes from the 60s or 70s. Yeah. They're just super narrow, like 8 inches wide, and they had crazy tall gearing, and they revved out to, like, some of them up to like 20,000 RPM.
Right.
But anyway, we built kind of like a what is the word? Kind of a
portmanteau,
a tribute to one of those, which was built around a Puch engine, and that was really the only piece that we used that we didn't make. We made the frame. Right. We took forks off of a different bike. We used wheels from like a French bike. We made our own fuel tank and seat assembly, and we even made the handlebars for it. So we made the swing arm, and then kind of created what it's called the Paragon. and it was like our version of a 50cc GP bike. And that through doing that, that's when we were like, oh, we can make frames and tanks, and what if we made more of these?
Oh man, that is so
And actually,
awesome.
it's funny you brought up Nieto, because the first engine we used in the first Janus, which was a 50cc two-stroke, was a Derby Senda, which is like the modern 6-speed water-cooled two-stroke 50cc version of what they were racing back in the day. And that thing would do 55 stock on 50cc's. And so I love two-strokes, but as soon as we decided we need to get through EPA to sell more units, that dream was broken.
Right out the window, right? So, okay, so now we're moving into the inception of Janus. So Janus, did the god Janus inspire the vision of the company, or did the vision kind of match the character, like what you were already doing? Did it match the characteristic of Janus, and it was kind of like a marketing discovery that you made while you're trying to find like a representation for this vision? Which came first, the Janus or the egg? Yeah,
that's a great question. I never had that one. It was absolutely the latter. We were struggling to find a name. The Paragon was that first bike. We actually named the company. Our legal entity is still Paragon Motorcycles.
Oh, cool.
But there's lots of Paragons. It's like Acme kind of. There's lots of them. So we
sell rocket skates ever, let me know.
So anyway, we were like, what are we going to find? How are we going to find a name that sounds good? And it's surprising. If you go back to the history of motorcycles, like most of the good names have been taken, and they're taken by now defunct companies. There have been so many motorcycle brands that were really cool, and then they built 200 bikes and went out of business.
Right.
The fact that we've made over 1,200 bikes at this point means that we're like, I don't know if we're like, I don't know the figures, but we're probably in like the top 10% of motorcycle manufacturers.
That's what I'm going back to the beginning. That's what I'm telling you. You're a big deal to me because you've succeeded. A lot of people do podcasts and only last 3 or 4 episodes. So, it's the motorcycle equivalent of that. You've stuck around. You probably have more out there on the road than Modus. Sure.
Modus. I don't think they made maybe 100.
Yeah, I mean
so. Yeah, so anyway, Janus, the Roman god, goes back to my love of architecture. I spent a lot of time in Rome when I was in school, and Janus is a Roman god who had a temple, arch in Rome, and a temple, and he is this really unique figure that has 2 heads, and one is looking to the future, and one is looking to the past, and he represents duality, war and peace. Like in times of, I always get it wrong. In times of peace, the door was closed of the temple, and in times of war it was open. And then he also represents like doorways. The month January is named after Janus. It's the beginning and end of the year.
So the beginning, looking forward and back, forward to the new year, backward to the, I get it. Yeah.
To answer your question, that was definitely, it was a name that kind of fit what we were trying to do.
Right.
To look to the past and the future at this kind of simultaneously and try and embody that in a vehicle. So,
what sizes did you start with? Did Janus ever have a 50cc?
Yeah, the whole company was started with a 50cc two-stroke motor, which we got from Derby, which is a famous Spanish motorcycle company that I think it's like, if it does still exist, it's owned by Piaggio.
It is actually.
Yeah, and they make this little it's really cool. I wish I will get one someday. It's a little sport bike, 50cc, 6-speed, and I mean, there's so many upgrades you can do to them that you can do like 80 miles an hour on these things. They sound so good.
I want to say Derby still makes a 3-wheel, kind of like a tuk-tuk sort of thing too.
They probably do.
Yeah, and they're pretty quick from what I've seen. So
they're fun. It's just like any two-stroke. You can just there's an infinite number of things you can do to them. But we started the company with that, and because we were making like super low production volume, it didn't really matter if we didn't have EPA.
Yeah.
We basically had 2 beginnings with Janus. One, when we started originally in 2011, and we built, over the course of about 4 years or so, we built 43 50cc Halcyons, which is our top model. And that's kind of a weird story because, the Paragon, the first bike we built, which is this like GP tribute bike, replica kind of.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
It was a cafe. It was like a GP style bike, and that was right at the kind of height or maybe tail end, but still like the reign of the cafe racer was in full effect.
Yeah.
And so our first bike, we just thought, without even thinking, it was like, oh, it's going to be a cafe style bike. I love these. I love GP bikes. The Paragon was one. And then somehow during that process, I got completely sidetracked by, like, as I started learning more about motorcycles and reading books about them and learning about the history, I started getting fascinated with like older like models like Brough Superior, which is an English brand, Vincent, any of the old brands. And right in that 1920s time period, they were at this point where they were still figuring stuff out, and they were like the form and the best way I can describe it is like the form and function somehow were at like this parity. They were kind of balanced. And great, basically, in my opinion, this is probably a contentious point of view, but by the 1990s, motorcycles had kind of like reached this point of, or 2000s even, this point of diminishing returns where everything was covered in plastic. It was like a two-wheeled car.
Right.
And we were trying to get back to something different.
Yeah, and honestly, since then, the biggest improvements have just been add-ons, kind of trickling down from the car world. There really haven't been any innovations.
It's like technology. It's like an extra 2 miles per hour, an extra, 5 horsepower. And then you're talking about numbers that 230 horsepower. Like, when are you going to actually experience that? Yeah. So anyway, we were thinking about cafe racers, but then I got sidetracked by these older bikes, and we developed this Halcyon concept, it's just kind of like, it's a hardtail, first of all, which is just totally weird. It's kind of looks like, it definitely is looking to like early Brough Superiors, early Triumphs, early Harley Davidsons, Indians, and it has this kind of unique fuel tank that. Oh yeah. Much of the design for the tank really just comes from the fact that we could make it. It was a shape that we could make with our really rudimentary manufacturing techniques, which is another part of our story. We have many of the parts of our bikes we either make ourselves within 20 miles of the shop, or we have a bunch of Amish craftsmen that make them for us.
Can you see my screen? It's almost like you're walking through the script I have written out perfectly. Like, this is such a great transition. Yeah. And I do want to talk about that after. The definition of the word halcyon, if I'm not incorrect, means like a thought back to like the milk and honey days, right? I mean, is that roughly the definition?
It's another mythological, like, it's kind of our theme, but halcyon is often today is like, the halcyon days are like the golden days of yore. Right. But really the mythology is that it's a bird. It's kind of like a kingfisher, and it lays its eggs, or it raises its young in these like little period of summer in the middle of winter. So it's like these golden days that are in it's like in the middle of winter. And
that's how the association with the word came about. Okay.
And it weeps over time's past. And so it's kind of like, we felt like it was really perfect for that model. You'll have to see a picture of it or look at a Janus to kind of understand that. But
yeah, absolutely. And I'd seen a few, and I've seen a few in the wild here in California, owned by crazy old guys that had everything but an old bike from the turn of the century. So they said, hey, I got this cool Janus, and here it is. And you wouldn't believe the motor, how much many crossover parts there are, I guess, with some Hondas and some other motorcycles that were out there. They said that they could crossover parts with it. And I'm looking at it, and I had to interview, or I didn't interview the guy, I don't think, but I talked to him for about an hour. I talked to everybody else for 5 minutes. I talked to this guy for an hour. He was so stoked on it, and he was just telling me about it. And I'm looking at it going, yeah, like this. And then that's when I really, and I'd heard of him before. So yeah, you've been around since 2011-ish, but when was that when you had a web presence then? I can't pinpoint when I first saw Janus, but I know it was a while ago. So
it's probably like early 2012 we kind of got started, and it was all home baked. I mean, I made the website. It was like, kind of an Instagram kind of company. We were just really small. And like I said, we were making these 50cc bikes. One bike would kind of fund the next one. We weren't paying ourselves. Right. And that's why I say we kind of had two starts, because at the end of building those 50s, we're like, hey, if we want to make this real, we need to have an EPA compliant engine. We need to meet all these regulations. And so we we were like, okay, let's go to the next size up, 250, and it's 4-stroke. And so to get to exactly what you were asking about the engine, we picked, because we're a small company and we don't have dealers, we're like, what's the best, and we're interested in the experience of riding. What would be the best engine for that function? And so what we decided on, and which is just becoming more and more clear to us as we have thousands of them out in the wild, is let's pick a motor that's low displacement, 250, and which is, it's like the easiest engine. First of all, it's like indestructible and easy to work on if you're the owner. So you don't even have to take it to a dealership or a repair shop. And so we found this motor called the CG 250, which is a Honda derived engine. It's made by some of the old suppliers for Honda, and it's basically like, it is literally bulletproof. I've ridden one of our bikes cross country. I mean, the same bike from the north of the country to the south, and done a lot of stuff in like iron butt style, like 1,000 miles in 24 hours. Basically, you're just running this thing at like wide open throttle for 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's like Le Mans.
Right, there you go. And I don't know if you and I had talked about it, but this is the bike that Honda, this motor is one that Honda had seen working in these horrible conditions, right?
Yes.
And I don't know if that was you and I that were talking about that. And they had decided, hey, we need to make these things in these other countries where this is being sold, the majority of it, they're really don't have the resources to really take care of it. We need to make a bulletproof engine. Exactly.
They were getting out competed in like developing markets, third world countries, by the other big Japanese motorcycle manufacturers who had 2-stroke motorcycles. Honda has never really into the 2-strokes as much, and so they're like, their CB 125, which is a phenomenal engine. It's a higher strung motor. It's overhead cam. It requires regular oil changes, valve adjustments, all these things that in these developing countries they actually sent out some engineers to like Pakistan and Southeast Asia and India, and they were like researching how these things are maintained, and these Japanese engineers were just like completely horrified by what they saw. No maintenance. The only time they would get worked on is when they like seized.
Right. They whip out the white glove and then they're like, never mind, and they just put it back in the pocket.
So they went back to Tokyo, and basically like, hey, we need to completely rethink how we do things if we're going to compete in this market. And so they developed the CG line, which is like, it's like the dumb little, sister of the CB. And it's a overhead valve. It's got a single push rod that operates both. Not a single cam that operates both intake and exhaust. So it's just like, there's not much you can do in terms of performance, but there's everything you can do in terms of maintenance. And like doing a valve adjustment for like if you've done it once, you can do it in like 15 minutes. It's just incredible. So anyway, that we decided on it. This is kind of like our model. And of course we have dealers, we have service shops, a network that we can send you to, or we can help you find one, but kind of the focus is on doing it yourself. And we also have like, we stand behind the motor so much that we're like, we have a 4-year warranty on the 250 engine, which I think is industry. I don't think anyone else does that. And it works out great for us because like we rarely have issues that require any kind of major problem. So anyway, that's the story of the 250 engine. We got it through EPA. It's carbureted, so that was crazy. We have a carbureted, modern compliant engine that actually burns really clean.
You've done what Royal Enfield couldn't even.
Right. So, yeah. I mean, when KLR finally realized they couldn't do it, the Kawasaki KLR finally they realized they couldn't do the carburation anymore.
When you decide to make a bespoke motorcycle company out of nowhere, and you probably aren't thinking EPA, you probably, there's a thousand things that are not on your mind when you decided to start this. How the heck do you decide where to start and all of the network? I mean, if you listen to the Why We Ride the Janus podcast, you talk to some of your suppliers and the relationships that you made. How did you even get into that? How did you start networking? How did you start sourcing components? How did all that even, come across your radar?
Oh man, we just scoured the internet. I mean, what we do would not be possible, I will say, without the amazing resource that the internet is. We get a lot of our parts from overseas. It's kind of weird because we have this huge Amish community that here in northern Indiana. We're kind of the capital of the RV industry, so that's kind of why this works so well here. And they don't even have the internet. So when we send them prints, we either have to drop them off or fax them to them. And most of the like chassis components, fuel tanks, bodywork, everything is handlebars, everything is made by them. But then on the flip side, we get our engines from China, we get our shock absorbers from Australia, we get our lighting from Taiwan, we get our instrumentation from Germany. Basically the best way to say it is like the specialty components we get from specialists that have, in many cases, half a century of experience doing what they do really well. And then we focus on the stuff that we do well, which is the design and the chassis component, the suspension design, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But we leave like DOT lighting. We get our lights from the same place the Indian does.
Right. And so, walk us through some of these components. I mean, you've got, I don't want to step on this. I'll let you explain it, but you've got a very special suspension and you've got some really cool instrumentation. A lot of people I saw commenting on the instrumentation and how it looked. So describe to us some of these components and their special origins, not just the fact that they harken back to an older time, but your frames, your suspensions, your fuel tanks, like all of this crazy stuff. What type of suspension are you running on these things? The suspension, well, first of all, the frame is real traditional, kind of like a featherbed style design. And then the suspension system, first of all, the Halcyon, our first model, doesn't have a rear suspension. Right. So that's kind of weird. That one's easy.
And that was partly because we're new, but then it worked out really well. But then the front suspension, on the 50s, we use a Italian small displacement telescopic fork, kind of universal style, kind of little telly. But then when we launched the 250, I was like, I've always wanted to design. Back even as a kid, I was designing car suspension systems, and I was just interested in doing that. I'm like, I really want to do my own suspension design, and I want to do it something different. And I had come across the leading link suspension, which, I mean, do yourself a favor and look into that. There's so many interesting qualities that the leading link has. Today it's only really used by sidecar bikes, mainly because it is so rigid. If you look at a modern Ural, it's probably the only other manufacturer.
Yeah. And I think if you race speedway, a lot of those bikes still have a leading link.
They have a very short leading link. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's tiny,
So anyway, I actually thought about you doing like a girder suspension, but girder, it really is outdated. And what I realized in the process of researching the leading link was that the telescopic fork is actually the one that's out of date. It was invented in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And the leading link is kind of an improvement on it in the sense that there's just all these different things about the telescopic fork, that it bends, it binds, your wheelbase and your change while you're riding it if you're under braking forces. Yeah. And the leading link design, if you engineer it correctly, it's very rigid. It doesn't need a fork brace or anything like that. It is a fork brace, and it actually, if you design it correctly, it has an anti-dive characteristic. So it's basically like modern car suspension.
Yeah, I tested that too, and I can confirm that there is no dive. I jammed on there. I told you, hey, I'm going to try it, and I jammed them on, and there's no dive. And as a matter of fact, BMW has gone to great lengths to make all these different front ends to not dive, but still look like telescopic forks and works sort of like telescopic.
They actually engineered the dive back into their new ones.
Oh, okay.
So that people would kind of be used to it. But BMW is a classic example. They were like, I think the first, people will argue with you, but they were like the first major manufacturer to use telescopic forks in the 20s. Then they kind of stole the leading link design from an English guy named Earls, and used that on all their bikes from the 50s through the 70s.
Into the 70s, yeah.
Yeah, into the 70s.
Mid-70s, you could still buy.
Yeah, and that's because a lot of them were used with sidecars, I think, too. But then they ditched it they went back to telescopic, and then they started using another design they stole from Norman Hasek, which is this really complicated
Well, yeah, I think they call it the
telelever design. Yeah.
Duo lever, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
basically like a Hossack front end. Yeah, there's all sorts of. I write the manuals for that, and when you look,
That's
when you
right.
look at it, there's like a ton of pieces to it, and you're like, how the hell does this work?
How does this connect to the handlebars?
Why is there so much to this? Yeah, and so many points of failure.
Yeah, it's a really neat design, but it's kind of classically German in the sense that it doesn't make as much sense from a manufacturing standpoint. It's like pretty impractical, but they're going to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, so your leading links, they look cool, they work great.
And most importantly, they make sense with our manufacturing process. They're easy for us to make because we can make the fork and then we can say, hey, let's leave the suspension, the actual shock absorber, to an expert. And if you're a customer and you want better suspension, you can go to Olin's and get a fork and put it on your bike.
Right.
It's so cool.
So modifiable. And that's something that you and I talked about, but I don't see a lot on I don't see you tooting your own horn on the Janus website, but you and I talked about just how customizable these things are, just like that.
The whole bike, yeah.
The whole bike. What about some of the in-house crew? Because I started picking up when you told me about that, I started looking at some of the videos that you have on your website, and it seems like it's almost like working with friends. It seems like, and everybody has their own little specialty, and it seems like everybody is just such a integral part of what they do, that they're on each and every motorcycle, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We got an incredible team. It's kind of like a family in a lot of ways. It's much of that is a product of the fact that our community is amazing. Goshen, this little kind of idyllic Midwestern town, very beautiful, and it's got a nice community. We don't have like a assembly line, so when there's a guy building your bike from like the frame, and then he takes it all the way through to the finished bike. Now, there's lots of different processes that go into that. So like the 450, for example, which you got to ride, we make that chassis. So we have a separate facility where we do chassis fabrication for the 450 line. So there's a team down there that only make those. And they come out here after a long process around the county of getting sandblasted, all the different processes that go into that. They come back here, and then there's Kelly is our shop manager, and she does all of the pinstriping. Or we have a new guy who's training under her, but basically she's done like 1,000 motorcycles of pinstripes. I mean, all the graphics you see on the bike are going to be all the graphics you see are hand pinstriped. So if that's the logo on the side of the tank, all the pinstriping on it, pinstriping on the wheels, all done by hand. And that's kind of a good illustration of like the way things are done. It's just like we have a guy who builds wheels.
Yeah, there you go. I saw a video a long time ago. I don't know if it was on YouTube, of the tanks being welded too, and I thought, oh wow, you guys make your own tanks and or fab all that stuff, and so it wasn't just like, that's one of the craziest things of a motorcycle that usually gets punched. I mean, there might be somebody that tack welds it here and there, but usually those are punched and stamped and spot welded by machines. Those are a complicated piece, but yours, like you said, this motorcycle is so simple that everything is it's crafted, and it looks, it looks the part, and it looks cool, and it's done by people there in Goshen. Speaking of Goshen, how did you land in Goshen, of all places that you could have started a motorcycle company? Goshen.
You'd think like Southern California or something, right?
Maybe.
No, I came out here to go to school. So I went here to go to Notre Dame. Is about 45 minutes west of us, and Notre Dame is in a town called South Bend. And I won't say it's true now. South Bend has really come a long way, but when I first moved there, I was like, oh my gosh, where am I? And my mother's from Kentucky and Indiana both, like, Indiana people think that Kentucky's hillbillies, and Indiana people think the opposite. I was always raised to think Indiana, oh dear. But I moved to South Bend, and I was like, oh, all my nightmares have come true. But then we started riding vintage mopeds down. There's a bar here in town called the Constant Spring, which is just the most poetic name, and it was a fantastic bar. I met my wife here in Goshen, and we just started kind of like the community. Like I said about like our employees, like the community is incredible, and the Chamber of Commerce is really like active, and they support you. Like, so we got a lot of support early on, and it was pretty clear that we wanted to be here. We didn't choose it because of the resources that are here. It was mostly
Right.
like we liked it, and I found myself here. And then afterwards, like 5 years later, I'm like, man, if we had tried this anywhere else, this would have totally failed.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. What a it's just nuts that that's how it worked out, and that it was a fortunate coincidence. you
Yeah,
know?
and absolutely. I mean, there's so much of the story is of fortune, happenstance. So also a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but a big part of it is the fact that we are in the middle of this RV industry, kind of like I hinted at earlier, the recreational vehicle. And 80% of RVs are made in Elkhart County, which is Goshen is the county seat, and that means that you can't go a mile with driving by a machine shop, a fabrication shop, a powder coater, or some kind of manufacturing, and it's all like these. You have some big assembly shops, like Keystone RV or Forest River or whatever the big brands are, but you also have these like little mom and pop shops or Amish shops that are feeding into that system, kind of like the automotive industry, like these are like tier 2 to the RV industry, which is its little tiny ecosystem. And so if we need a part made, I mean, it's just we go down the street. It's incredible.
That is pretty incredible. It's a huge achievement. I mean, that's pretty amazing. That community, like you said, it's so crazy. It's just awesome that it worked out how it did, and that you're that, the proximity and the fact that there's that much community involvement, and it does really sound like it supports, especially as the world gets more global and fractured, that it still supports. Something there locally.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of achievements, you've done, you alluded to it earlier at the, almost an hour ago now, the crazy things you've done. You've had a lot of achievements on Janus and with Janus. I mentioned Jay Leno's garage. I kind of threw that one out there. I was hoping to save it for this, but you've got some pretty big media attention. And I know you were out here in SoCal for a press event.
Yeah.
You also did something crazy. You mentioned that you've ridden all around, and I know that you mentioned to me the George Wyman route, and so I wanted you to expand on that a little bit, because this is something
absolutely
that you knocked it out of the park with.
So George Wyman, I don't know if anybody, probably you don't know who he is. George Wyman was a guy, a famous bicycle racer. I believe he was a racer in the around the turn of the century, so 1900, and he got it into his head that he was going to ride this motorcycle. I think he got a bet for $50, which was probably more than it is now, but like probably not that much more. And anyway, he got a California motorcycle, which was one of the first early American motorcycles. I think it was 225 cc's, so very close to what we have. Our bike's actually 229 cc's, not 250. And in 1902, I think it was, he rode from San Francisco all the way to New York City in like 51 days. And so just to put this in context, that no one had ever ridden a motorized vehicle of any kind across the country. So the first person to cross the U.S. on a motorized vehicle did it on a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Not many people know that.
And there was no roads. There may have been wagon trails at the time, but there
were no roads.
I believe. I think I've read part of his story, and he tried to ride on railroad tracks because that was like the only thing. And his spleen almost got jiggled out of his body, and I think his kidney almost erupted. He was like, "This is horrible." It's like it's as comfortable as riding on railroad tracks on across the. I don't know if they call those the ties, like the sleepers or something. Yeah, is about as comfortable as you could imagine. A washboard for thousands of miles.
Yeah, and he had no. It was literally those old bikes were literally bicycles with a motor strapped to them, and so he was. So, I mean, he was constantly breaking stuff. Like his handlebars broke, he'd replace it with a piece of wood,
right?
Like a stick or something, and then blah blah blah. But anyway, he was really like a month after he did it, somebody did it in a car and stole all the thunder, and nobody remembers who George Wyman was. But anyway, there's a fella about I don't know how many years he's been doing it. He's a long distance rider with the Iron Butt Association, which is a really cool group of people that ride insane distances, and he basically has taken George Wyman and trying to kind of like expand the understanding of what he did. And he's formed this thing called the George Wyman Memorial Route, and you can follow that route today on your motorcycle. If you look it up, it's got waypoints along the way. He's made little signs all the way across the country in all the places that Wyman went through. And actually, George Wyman rode through Goshen, Indiana, and so we are the waypoint here. We have a big plaque on the side of the wall for George Wyman. He came through on the train track, I think, because on the road and the track. Some of the road wasn't in good enough condition. So anyway, in 2018, I participated in a ride with a bunch of BMWs and Harley Davidsons, riding across country, and we were doing we did it in 5 or 6 days.
Oh gosh, wow!
And these bikes, they were zipping along, and I would get in at I'd leave at 5 a.m. and get in at 10 or 11 at night, exhausted, and they've all already in bed already,
Right. Well, you know what? I mean, that just speaking to your point, that you made earlier, there's riding and then there's adventure. They were commuting this trail where I feel like you were you had George Wyman's, adventurous spirit, going on this. So that's pretty amazing. And I imagine that George Wyman started this with the body of it. I don't know how old he was. Let's just say he's
bicycle racer.
20s. Yeah, he started with the body of a bicycle. He probably showed up there with the body of a 63-year-old man with kidney failure and half a spleen. He's probably tore him up,
Oh, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I think he walked most of the way. I mean, just pushed the thing.
Yeah, he's just, screw this. But that is awesome. And the fact that you've done it on a 250 that kind of looks the part. I mean, it looks like you could have one of these in the 1920s. So that's awesome. I love that you are walking the walk. You know what I'm saying? You're not you don't just design these bikes. You're doing stuff on them. Speaking back to the reliability and all the stuff with the motor, was this your first torture test of this thing? Were you hoping you made it, or were you pretty confident?
Oh yeah, I mean, as the designer, you can't help but kind of worry, that something's going to go wrong. And I the only issue I had was, the bike just I described it as a sewing machine the entire way. I was just wide open throttle. There was no support. So I had all my gear, all my tools, all my spare parts, everything on the bike.
That's awesome.
I had big metal panniers on the back. And so I was pretty loaded down, and I'm a big dude. And
right, you're 7'3".
6'6", remember?
Oh, okay, there you go.
And so I was doing 63 miles an hour top. Our bikes do about 70 top speed. I'm 63 miles an hour on Interstate 80 all the way across the country.
That's awesome.
And it was just completely wound out. I had a throttle lock, and I would just lock it open.
Right.
And then if you get a truck going by you can get a little faster. But,
a little draft. That's awesome.
Right. But anyway, the only issue I had was right before I left, I'm we had updated a part for the EPA compliance. And this is right around when we got EPA compliance. So I updated the intake manifold with this special gasket that we needed. And I forgot to add longer bolts with the thicker gasket.
Oh, right.
And so it was they were held on by barely a couple of threads, and I didn't even think about it. And so I got into Nevada or maybe even further along, and the intake basically started leaking and essentially fell off. And I thought it was the end of the trip, and then I realized I just needed longer bolts.
Just some bolts. That's all I need. Yeah, that's a oh my gosh, what a save though. That's such a, for all the things that it could have been, that is an epic that's an epic save. And then I know some of the other achievements that you have that you might not immediately think of, but that struck me is that I think you said you have a Janus in every state.
That's right, we do. We have a Janus motorcycle in every state now. It's taken us a while, but we have multiple bikes, I think, in most states. We have bikes up in Alaska. We have bikes up north of the Arctic Circle. We have bikes in Hawaii. We have bikes in Florida. Of course, all the other states. I think West Virginia was one of the last ones that we didn't have.
Not a lot of motorcyclists in West Virginia.
Which is weird because it would be a great spot for it.
Yeah, everybody's too busy in the coal mines to ride. And then also other achievements. I mean, you started out with this 250, but and when I knew Janus first, that was the whole draw. I love 250s. I'm a weirdo for 250s. And here's a 250 that looks so awesome. But you also had you didn't just have the Halcyon. I think you had one called the Griffin. Mm-hmm. And I think you might still have the Griffin. But now you have a 450 version of it. And like you said, that's what I got to ride. What inspired that? And what are some of the differences between that and the 250 version?
Great question. Yeah, so you mentioned we were on Jay Leno's garage, and I like to credit Jay for really laying out or formalizing what we wanted to do with the next model. But it was something that our owners had also, we actually just sent out our owner survey like earlier this week. But we regularly send out an owner survey and ask people what they like, what they don't like, what they want to improve, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that we had heard was like, hey, if you make another model, we'd like it to be not, 120 miles an hour fast, but fast enough to get on the highway.
Yeah.
And then we'd also like rear suspension if it's going to go that fast, and a little more power. And so we kind of put all that together, and we're like, hey, what we want to do is make a bike that is a little more versatile, because the 250, even though people like me will take it on the interstate all the way across the country or whatever, or I don't care. Some people want to, be able to pass cars and stuff like that, and I get it. Make it more versatile, and so we set on the kind of a parameter of we want a bike that can go at least 80 miles an hour. The 450 does 90. We want a bike that has about twice the horsepower, but not any more than that.
Right.
We want it to be as lightweight as we can. We wanted it to be, I think the goal was 350 pounds. It's about 360 pounds, so we slightly overshot that. We wanted it to have rear suspension and basically not change. Everybody's like, we love the way the Halcyon looks.
Yeah.
Don't change that. And so
Absolutely.
we went to great lengths to basically preserve the Halcyon concept as a full suspension, 90 mile an hour capable, highway capable, a little bit heavier, a little bit more like it's got a little more heft to it.
Yeah.
Version of the 250.
I don't think you can add double the CCs and rear suspension and not, and stay the same weight. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But it didn't feel like, just like the 250. It didn't feel. You're not talking about a 600-pound bike.
Right, because it doesn't require to do that. You can't just like throw a bigger engine in the existing frame. Like we went 100. It was like a 120% redesign, new frame,
Right.
completely different frame, new suspension. The rear suspension's got its own story at some point.
I forget that bike has two pipes on it too. So
yeah,
right?
The trick with that one was then what kind of motor are we going to find that meets all the criteria of the 250?
Right.
So like serviceable, long history of production, super reliable. So we ended up finding the Honda XR 400 motor, a modern version of that made by SWM, which is an Italian brand, it's a radial 4-valve Honda, so it has two intake and two exhaust ports. So it'll fool people. Some people will think it's a twin, but it's actually a big old single.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty epic.
So yeah, the 450 is it's our answer to being a little bit more versatile, a little more power, but still maintaining our thing, which is lightweight. A lightweight bike that's like not all about. It's about honing in on the experience of riding, and really what we try to do is also like create a real differentiation between the 250 and the 450. So the 250, honestly, we're better able to talk about the 250 now because it answers a distinct need, as opposed to the 450's fuel injected also. So it's like you have like a little bit more technology on it. You have a lot more, double the instrumentation, which is still pretty minimal. The 250 only has a little speedo. That's it. There's no, you feel everything. You don't need to worry about what your RPM is. The 450 has a tachometer and speedometer and more. It has like a fuel level sensor, things like more modern things.
Yeah.
So it creates a nice segment that's like, hey, I want this or I want this. And a lot of people still want that dirt simple, minimalist 250 that does like 90% of what most people do on a motorcycle anyway, which is curvy roads at 45 to 60 miles an hour.
Oh yeah. And the 250. Oh, something else I didn't bring up is when we were riding up in the hills. I think you had your GoPro on. A, we're in stop and go traffic, and then B, once we did get up in the twisties, we got stuck behind a sewer, and plumbing truck. And I was like, if he's got his GoPro, this is gonna make great audio. Just somebody sitting dead center behind a sewer truck. Once all the traffic got out, and you guys we were at the top looking over the valley. You let me rip both of them, and I gotta say the 250 with the rigid frame actually feels like you can chuck it into corners a little. Absolutely. With no fear. You know what I'm saying? Especially with that leading link front end, that thing is just a little road hugger, and the 450 kind of sinks into the corners a little more with the rear suspension.
Yep.
But the two, I mean, they're both so much fun, and that was the perfect road to take them on. Even though we didn't get to ride the expanse of it because of the closures, just a little bit we did get to ride on was so fun, because that's the perfect road for that, and it was the perfect environment, and you don't have to be going 100 miles an hour to have fun, right? You just
the reason I ride, and I think the reason, I mean, I won't speak for everyone, like there's many reasons we ride, but the reason that I ride, and a lot of our owners ride, and a lot of other people ride, is they want to experience the sort of augmented reality. And when I say that, I mean a very different thing than a virtual reality.
Right.
The augmented reality of the real world. And what a motorcycle can do is it's a machine that can help you augment reality. Because what is there that's more moving and more powerful than propelling yourself through the world, and to be able to do that with like this motor that makes you go faster than you can run.
Right.
And being able to control that motor, and like, to me, the most fun thing is like downshifting into a corner. I love that.
Yeah.
And,
Oh yeah.
You know, like just ringing a bike out, and you can't do that on a Ducati on a little road. Like,
no.
you're in second gear.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that 250, I took it down the hill, and so I was going uphill, and there was a car coming, and I let him get way ahead of me, and I thought he was so far. I was like, I'm gonna blow by Richard, leaning this thing in the corner. You know, you had your camera out, taking pics, and I was like, I'm gonna be leaning over through this corner just so you can get a good shot.
And you're on his bumper.
Well, and I caught up to him, and I was thinking, this is the 250. He'll get up through the turns, and I start going when he was halfway up the hill, and I caught him before he even got to the top of it, and I'm going, oh my gosh, it's just so much fun, and just full speed through there without braking is just, it was so amazing. Speaking of augmenting reality and virtual reality and getting out of it, if I could have a helmet that could project 1920s LA in a heads up while I'm riding a Janus, and just get rid, you'll still see the traffic and you'll still see the streets and everything as they are today, but it would remove the skyscrapers. It would put back all the weird, little ranches and farms, and just to cruise that thing through LA. You can feel the old, it brings you back to a time when, riding through here would have been a whole different experience on this, and just being on that bike rather than a sport bike, and having, especially going up with all that traffic, having to lug first gear up that hill on a sport bike, would have really stunk. And on the Janus, it was just fun, just weaving back and forth, just having a blast. So
to me, it's like the augmented reality of it is that it lets you get into the fun part of motorcycling.
Yeah.
On your ride to the post office, like
there you go.
You don't need to be out in the middle of like Moab or whatever,
right.
Big Sur or something to get that experience. It's like it's right out your front door, and that's like that's what we're trying to. That's what like you can get a lot of bike for that. Yep, that's what we're trying to give you is a lot of experience of motorcycling for that.
Yeah, exactly. And this you can't get a lot of a bike like this for that, for sure. And wrapping up. I hope you make a Griffin 450, by the way. We haven't even talked about the Griffin, but it's your like dual sport model. And if that comes out, come back on the show. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But wrapping up here, you told me in one of your emails that, Honda always said you meet the nicest people on a Honda, and you also say you meet the weirdest people on a Janus. I'm sure for you that was, coming out here, who is this weirdo that's on my motorcycle now? It was a blast, and it was so much fun. And I mean, I feel like we're just getting into the tip of the iceberg on you and the company and where you're going.
But I think that's a good introduction. The weird people.
It's a good tip. Yeah.
It's a good tip. Yeah. It's a niche. We call it our corner of the playground.
Right.
And it's not going to appeal to everyone. And what that means is the people that it does appeal to are some very interesting people. And it's a fun place to be. Our corner of the playground is just like, it's all about, meeting new people, getting out there, and just experiencing something it's almost like a it's more of a statement of defiance, let's just say. I can say this with complete confidence than it is to ride a Harley Davidson and be a kind of outlaw. It's much more defiant to ride a 250 or a 450 that's made by hand and that does this weird stuff and looks like it does. So
absolutely.
We have a lot of fun doing it.
And the best part is that you don't have to buy a Ferrari or a crazy Ducati, Panigale Race Edition to be in this club. You buy a 250 that is, twice as fun to ride around town, and you don't have to take it to a track in order to enjoy it. You know what I'm saying?
Our 250s do cost more than a KLR, quite a bit more, but it's not in the realm of a Ducati or any even like a more expensive Harley Davidson. They're their own thing, and we welcome you to learn about them.
Buy a bagger or 3 Januses,
right?
or Jani, whatever the.
I like Jani. Yeah, 2 eyes.
Nice. Hey, before we wrap up, I have a couple crazy questions. If you wanna blast through them, I've asked everybody that's been on the show. I forgot a couple people here and there, but most everybody has answered these, and it's a riot, and it's just a little bit more of a view into the personality behind the person who runs Janus. So,
go for it.
You ready to start these?
Let's go.
So the first one, and this is actually mixed. These are responses, believe it or not. What's your favorite grip, the left or the right?
Your favorite grip? Ooh, I like the right, just because you get to use the throttle. And to me, again, it's not accelerating. That's the fun part. It's double clutching on the way, or, flipping the throttle as you downshift.
There you go.
That is the most fun part. So yeah, the right hand.
There you go. And that's the majority. That's the as Steve Harvey would say, that's the number one answer. What's your favorite dog breed?
Favorite dog breed? A mutt.
Nice. That goes back to the first Janus tribute. What's your favorite song? And I guess it doesn't have to be of all time, but maybe just right now, or something that you listen to in the shop or when you're riding, just something that gets you in your happy place.
Oh man. Well, we're talking. The term we use to describe what we do at Janus is rambling, or at least recently I've been talking about that. So it's not my favorite song, but I've been listening to all the Ramble songs that are out there.
Gotcha.
From Ramble On to Ramblin' Man, and they're a good soundtrack to motorcycling.
Nice. That's pretty good. That'd be a good playlist to have. That's just songs with Ramblin' in the title. Now this might be crazy because you're in Indiana and you're in Goshen and you're very near Amish territory, and I'm sure there's a diverse opinion on this. But what's your favorite type of sandwich?
Favorite type of? Ooh, that's a good one. I feel like I'm gonna get this wrong. I won't remember.
It's your sandwich. I won't judge.
I like horseradish and roast beef.
Oh, boom. Would you ride your Janus 100 miles to get a horseradish roast beef sandwich?
Absolutely.
Nice. What's your favorite month?
Oh, we'll just go with January.
I was thinking that after your answer before of Janus. Now this one.
Although it kind of stinks in northern Indiana.
Well, yeah. That's why you're out here doing press.
That's right. Yeah.
What is your favorite character from the movie Spaceballs?
Who's the Darth Vader character?
Oh, Dark Helmet,
yeah.
All right. Hey, well, we had a couple technical glitches there, but we're gonna cut out our list. We'll come back. I'm gonna have you on because I'm gonna do this again. We need to know these questions if they're important. So,
all right.
But anyways, hey, thanks for coming on. Thank you for spending some time wasting a perfectly good hour of your day. And if anybody wants to get a hold of you or find more about Janus, the brand, obviously, if they're listening to your podcast, they know where they're at, 100%. But if they do want to find out more about the brand and check out some of your, the video offerings and things that you have, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find us at janusmotorcycles.com. So JANUS motorcycles.com, and that's like our main website. And you can also, of course, find us on our YouTube, which is where we do most of that's. We call YouTube is our dealership. So look up Janus Motorcycles on YouTube. And we have not only videos that like tell you about the product, but that's also where a lot of our maintenance information is. So we have a lot of videos about how to do your valves or whatever for your bike. So you can explore a lot about the bikes that way. And then of course we're on all the other social media stuff. So yeah. Nice. And then for our listeners, Creative Riding is a podcast that we'll have links to where it is, but they have a lot of folks on, and they focus on kind of the stories that aren't told in the mainstream. So it's a really fun place to check out interesting things related to motorcycles, and I highly recommend it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your time, and just picking up on the opportunity, presenting the opportunity to ride one of your fabulous motorcycles while you were out here.
Thanks for giving us a tour and taking us on a ride.
Listen, next time we won't get lost. We'll come over to my side. But yeah, I had a blast. Well, I hope you we'll stay in contact, and I hope you have a great rest of the quote winter. I hope it turns spring real soon, and everyone's out there riding on a Janus soon.
Oh, Junky, getting lost is a success in the Janus rambling world. But absolutely. Likewise, had a great time. Thank you so much, Junky, and we'll catch you next time.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.